We heard that Harpswell Coastal Academy was closing, and we were hoping you can tell us more about the story of HCA.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Harpswell Coastal Academy began in
I'm gonna make this my background.
Piper. We're doing an interview right now, bud.
Okay, well, if you show me how to do it, I'll leave.
Okay.
I think the first sort of domino that fell in the story of HCA was that this school was closed.
The school building that we're in right now is the West Harpswell School campus, and it was a school in the town of Harpswell for many years as an elementary school. Before HCA came in and was founded and started using this building, it had been part of SAD 75, the Topsom and Ararat district.
SAD 75 voted to close the West Harpswell School and consolidate that population into what is now the Harpswell Community School.
People just thought it was a shame, that we didn't have a school on the neck anymore. There was a group of people that just started to meet and discuss the possibility of opening a school. And one way or the other, I got wind of that conversation, and I suggested that there was somebody I knew who thought could help the group out.
I can remember probably about 11 years ago being in a meeting in the town office with the town administrator and a few other community members and John Denieri, who came to sort of pitch the idea of a school because that's sort of what we were looking for in our community.
I guess the short version is that that citizen group got together and there was sort of, how do we do this? Could we do it as a private school? And I was not terribly interested in doing it as a private school. I've never worked in private schools. If we wanted to do it as a public school, there's this new charter law coming about. Should we do that or shouldn't we? And the more folks we talked to, the more people thought that A, saving the school was a good idea, and B, doing it as a public charter school was a good idea.
So a charter school is a school that was authorized through the state to operate based on a particular mission statement. So in the state of Maine, there are certain laws that govern public charter schools that are, authorized through the state. And they're looking for schools that have a particular mission and something like kind of unique that they're bringing to the educational landscape in Maine.
John Denieri was floating an idea, I forget the exact name of it, but it was very much about a high school model that was very anchored in a place and was not so much about a sit and get, in desks and chairs and classrooms, but more about being involved in the community, growing food. It was a very ambitious project. I knew John from when I was a teacher at Casco Bay High School in Portland. He was a consultant that we worked with, and his history was with experiential education and with getting schools going.
Experiential education, project-based learning, student-centered learning, and these are all things that mean something in the education world, or at least did then. So they sound like just buzzwords, but they actually had a lot of history and practice behind them.
Experiential learning is really all about getting students to understand an authentic context for what they're learning.
Instead of students kind of being isolated in a classroom with like a traditional teacher giving instructions and students expected to follow along, I was really intrigued by the concept that HCA was trying to partner with community organizations and people in order for students to do like real meaningful work that would be mutually beneficial for both the students and the partners.
We really want our students doing novel work in their chosen field. So we want the work to be application of a skill rather than just repetition of a skill.
The central ideas were not a school that was primarily designed to boost people's grades or test scores or get them into college or those kinds of traditional things, but a school that would enable all of our graduates to come out knowing how to interact with adults, having had lots of experiences working with and alongside adults in the community, not just in school. Getting kids out of the school on a daily basis. On our first couple of years, every student was out of this building either on a walk or on various, our physical education program. Because we had few relatively few students, but very few teachers. And so we had a group that took people on a walk every day. We had another group that engaged in a kickball tournament, you know. But it was the ways in which students got outside of the building were basically as many as we could figure out and afford.
Like, you can learn a lot by understanding both the natural and human worlds that you are a part of. It's, you know, about building connections to community, about bringing experts in, about going out to talk with people, to learn about local businesses, organizations, resources, explore land trusts and natural resources around you, and using all of those things that, you know, students probably interact with in some way on a regular basis in their communities as a springboard for learning and seeing the relevance in what hopefully then is like a project-based framework.
When we had the big meeting where the charter people came, it was really amazing, because I think the whole town must have been there.
I think we were just really excited that there was an opportunity to keep a school in Harpswell. And so the town did everything that they could to make the school a success.
By the time September rolled around, we'd already had a board meeting every single week to try to make sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and we had buses and we had teachers and we had contracts and we had insurance, and I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
The first week we had no furniture. It was a very bare bones operation.
First of all, we'd known our kids that were coming already. And this is one of the things that I really miss about the early years. We used to do an event called the Shore Dinner.
And it was just a huge, very joyful, very successful community fundraiser that helped everybody to sort of meet the students, see who they were, and, you know, enjoy the best of Harpswell in August.
Our kids coming into that first day already kind of knew each other a little bit because of that, and already had this sort of like service hat on. And then the news trucks showed up.
Well, it is the first day of school for many Maine students, but also for two of Maine's newest charter schools. Harpswell Coastal Academy and Fiddlehead School of Arts and Science opened their doors today.
At Harpswell Coastal Academy, the school is teaching 60 6th and 9th graders. You don't have to have a structured class environment to learn.
Our goal is to have public school work for as many kids as possible.
The day-to-day for those first couple years were, we used the phrase all hands on deck. That was really important to us. Certain things like community meeting, and we used a restorative justice process, and we had regular resolution circles around student behavior and stuff like that. So there were some things that were regular every day, but there wasn't really part of our thing was we wanted to maintain flexibility, so we had a set schedule, but we frequently varied the schedule. A typical day that first year might have been students in two different groups, half the school at once for the morning and then the other half of school for the afternoon, walking down to Curtis Cove and doing some sort of citizen science project. Playing outside, a typical day always involved, even in the winter, kids and teachers outside playing.
Like, it was science class because we were going out and we were testing the salinity and we were looking for, I don't remember exactly what we were looking for. I know we were testing salinity, but it was so much fun. Like, we went out there and like we all got covered in mud, and we came back and none of us were wearing our shoes because we all got stuck, and so all of our shoes came off and we were like pulling them out, and it was like we were all bonding and like we were just being kids, you know. We were being kids and we were playing in the mud and like having fun and experimenting, but this was also our classroom. We were in school.
And I think one of the things that was really interesting in that phase was that everything was new. I did have the opportunity to come visit, I think in October of that very first school year, so like 2 months in. And I remember meeting in what's classroom 1 right now. And there was a staff meeting, and they were figuring out like, what are we doing today? Like, there was no set schedule. So they were all like, all right, so we have an opportunity to go to the farm up the road. When do we want to do that? Who's going? What are we going to do in between? So that first, it was like very much like forming, and it was loose. They were trying to kind of figure out what was going to work best. They didn't want to lock into like structures that would really kind of constrain what they were able to do, because they were building these new community partnerships and getting to know students. So I remember sitting in on crew that day, and it was a conversation about like, how is it going? It's 2 months in, like what's working, what's weird, what do we need to change? I think that's something we still do a lot of, is that check-in around like, how are things going? Do we need to shift and adjust?
On the first day, I remember just like being so nervous. I didn't even want to go to school because I was thinking it's going to be the same old as other schools. But when I showed up, my teachers like actually paid attention to me. They asked who I was, what my name was, like how I was feeling, which was like new and different, and I just felt so accepted into the community instantly.
I don't know, you could just always expect to be coming into an environment, I felt like, where I was heard and that I could go about my education in a way that interested me and that I really enjoyed.
The very first visit I made to the school before I got on the board, I went into a science class and they were doing Rube Goldberg machines. Golf clubs were involved, rubber chickens were involved. It was physics, but nobody was saying so. They were just figuring out that if you need the ball to go up the hill here, it has to go down this hill at a certain velocity or it's not going to make it up. I just thought, this is what education should be like. This, not rows of chairs and somebody at the front droning on, but people figuring stuff out.
It was really collaborative in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting and really appreciated. And not just collaborative amongst different teachers, but amongst the administration and with the students and support staff. And all of that kind of came together to try to just do what was best for the kids. And that kind of approach and goal was not what I was like expecting getting into teaching, which is what I always thought I wanted to do. But I quickly like saw the importance of all that and jumped on board.
The first 2 years, I drove a bus in the morning and the afternoon, a little bus. It was either year 1 or year 2. I picked up some students, brought them to school, and then we had a community meeting every day, and I went out to lead community meeting. And that kid raised his hand. It's like, why is the school bus driver talking to us? Like, that was a beautiful thing.
The first year was really, it was challenging. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was exciting. And it was overwhelmingly positive, and our student had a lot of personal growth that year.
After we opened in that September, and we were adding another grade, so it would have been 7th and 10th, it really became pretty clear that space was going to be an issue.
I was kind of part of that team that was like establishing a whole new campus and setup. And so like we had a different space that first year in Brunswick where we got to the building, we said, okay, we're not gonna have individual classrooms per se, you're not gonna have your own space, but we're gonna kind of do almost like a lottery to like choose who's gonna kind of have which room as a crew space, but we're all gonna use all parts of the building and be flexible.
And then we moved to, well, we were supposed to move to this other building that would have housed more of us, but it wasn't ready at the start of the school year. The fire safety guy came and said no. So we had probably 2.5 months where we were kind of using all these random buildings around the YMCA and a local college. And then also we would just convene in this huge field right next to the building we used to go to school in. So super weird.
Like a day in my senior year, we were at the base, but we had moved into a building, which is now, I think, BIW, but we had moved into a building kind of tucked towards the back of the base, which was honestly, I really liked that building.
So I think in some ways that kind of created some interesting differences in how Div 2 and Div 3 operated, because they had these non-traditional school spaces from year 3 on, whereas Div 1 was in a very traditional elementary school building.
It seemed brilliant to have the high school up there close to town, closer to Region 10, close to SMCC, and be able to have kids avail themselves of those opportunities, and to have this be more you know, a forming place for the students of that particular age.
We always had this like framework we came back to, those forming, storming, norming, performing. I would say that year 1 and 2 was definitely like the forming. Then I think in that year 3 to 4, we maybe hit that like storming, where we kind of talked about like, now things are going to start to get messy because we've kind of established some things, but not everything's perfect yet. And then I think we got into this point where it was always like, this is the norming year. And I think it was always a little muddled between the norming and the storming. Like, I think those things were very much like back and forth for a while in the middle, where some things were getting locked in, some things maybe were getting locked in that were not ideally what we originally intended. You know, I think there was mounting pressure to perform better on standardized tests or to address the needs of students that were coming with a lot more kind of academic gaps that needed to be filled.
The students at HCA, generally speaking, I think we're looking for a place to come to feel safe, to be able to be authentically who they are or were in any given moment, and to be accepted for it.
Some kids were incredibly engaged every time I've come. Some kids have really struggled with being there, being present anywhere. I've never seen so many people having a difficult time making it work, and I've never seen such creative people making it work. And I came to realize that some folks who come here as students start out in that first camp of really struggling to be there and do stuff, and that the experience of being here rather than somewhere else brings them out of that place and into the second camp. When that works, I think it's the best thing that the school does.
There were lots of significant experiences around individual students who struggled deeply to get to school or to be at school or to feel safe in school. So many of our students had not felt safe or felt like they could learn productively in the schools that they had come from, that it was not easy work to get them to trust that any school or any group of adults would actually treat them with respect and both sort of love them but also hold them to standards, you know. I have a lot of just memories of sitting in that office over there, talking with a student or two and saying, yeah, but this can be a good place for you, but only if. And seeing those students go from first week or two or even month here may have been extremely challenging and even explosive at times, but who by the end of year 1 or 2 were like our leading citizens. And one student in particular who had had just an extraordinarily difficult set of experiences before he got here. By our second year here, and he would often take the role of helping younger kids, maybe kids who were not feeling comfortable participating out on the athletic field or in the gym in our massive basketball games. And he would be the one who like put his arm around them and was like, it's okay. Which, if you knew this kid, that was a huge change from the extraordinarily like tough, don't F with me exterior that he started with.
Before HCA as a student, I really struggled with going to school and listening to what I felt were rudimentary practices at the time. I remember frequently telling teachers that they were wrong and explaining to them why. I remember refusing to do work that I knew how to do already. And there's some truth to all of that. Like, there's also some truth to, like, I was a kid going through a lot and I was rude to people around me. Like, that wasn't the way I should have approached the situation. But there's also truth to public education in the US not taking care of people like they're people.
Before coming to HCA, I just didn't like school. I didn't meld with the typical public school ways, so of course I was having difficulty. But I think it would have been shyer, and I do not think I would have at all shared many similarities with who I am now. I think I would have definitely been a different person. I don't even know what I would have done as a career.
I'm very much so a hands-on learner, and I'm not good at sitting still, and I just, like ADHD to the max. But, so I had to kind of be in the environment where I can be in control of everything, and I can be in control of what I want to do and what I want to learn about and how I go about doing that.
I see this as a place for a lot of people that learn in different ways to come and be able to expand their creativity.
The staff at HCA taught me a lot. They really molded who I am. I still keep in contact with many people, and I've said this before, but when I come to HCA, I feel like I'm coming back to where I belong in an educational perspective.
One of the things, I had been, in education for a long time, and I had seen the way schools hire, which is largely on resumes and accomplishments. And I knew from past experience that that wasn't going to be the right type of teacher for us. So among other things, we were looking for people who eagerly said, I get this, I have to wear many hats thing. I know I'm being hired and my job title is English teacher, but I'm going to have to do other things as well. One thing we wanted was people who eagerly embrace the idea that a teaching job wasn't going to be 3 sections of English 9 and 2 sections of English 10. We wanted folks who could be flexible. This year you might do this, next year you might do this. That was one.
Everybody knew that their job was to wear many hats, to be available to counsel kids, to be available to clean the floors.
Teachers really have a lot on their plate. All teachers have a lot on their plate. Teachers at HCA are really expected to be able to expand their knowledge and skills in a variety of subject areas, whereas in a public school, teachers might be able to focus on 1 or 2 subjects.
And then we definitely were looking for people who understood and maybe themselves had experience with non-successful education. We had some folks who came in thinking it was going to be sort of like a groovy place to kind of do, but not the hard stuff. And we were much more successful with people like Ms. Simmons, who had previously worked at SAD 25 and knew what working with the most difficult kids was like and eagerly embraced that.
I love teaching at HCA. And it's hard to be a teacher at HCA.
Teaching here was tough. There was a lot of need that we couldn't always meet. And because everyone was so dedicated to doing everything we could to provide the best experience we could, it created a lot of pressure on the teachers, myself included. So I think the biggest challenge was just feeling like there was always more I could do.
Teachers and leaders were constantly wrestling with what that meant. How do you give people the free rein to learn the way they need to discover things on their own, at the same time make it orderly enough and safe enough for all the other students here?
For me as a teacher, I kind of kept operating the same way I was in college in many ways. It was like, you go to class, you do your things, and then you have homework to do. And as a teacher, I felt the same way. It was like, okay, class is done, but now I have to go do my homework. I have to assess everything. I have to plan out what I'm doing. We were building everything from scratch, and so it wasn't like I had a curriculum handed to me and said, you're teaching this, here are all your lessons. So my experience was this constant cycle of I'm working during the school day, and then I'm going home and I'm working, and then I'm coming back and I'm doing it over again. And I liked that for a long time. And I think many of the other teachers that I worked with also liked that. It was fun creating stuff and not having anyone tell you what you have to teach and being able to figure that out.
I enjoy having some freedom to teach where my kids are at. I can look at any class that I have and say, okay, this isn't going to work for this group. I need to do something different. Or this group is coming in with this level of knowledge, and so this is where I need to start from.
And so I think that was great to a point. And then I think there were, people with different capacities for keeping up that pace of work. And there were people who maybe did it for a little while and then were just like, this is so much. Like, I never stop. Like, I can never get my brain out of my job, whereas other people might have like set hours at their workplace and then they go home and they can like leave it in that brain space and not like still be working.
Everyone, like, or almost every one of our staff members rose to the challenge. But rising to that challenge day after day, month after month, year after year, among those things. And we were talking about best practices, you know, so I was like saying, whatever we're gonna do, it's not gonna be about like, so a best practice was sending kids home in June and saying, we'll see you in September, is absolutely not correlated with anything we know about how students learn. You have people who have a sense of belonging, maybe who don't have a sense of belonging at home, and you're going to send them home for 2.5 months in the summer? That's a disaster. So we were trying to do summer school, mandatory summer school. It was, the first year, it was 2 different 4-week chunks, and you had to come to either the first one or the second one. But we wanted to stay connected with our students over the summer, and therefore our teachers had to work half of the summer. That became a sticking point pretty early on, where teachers were feeling like, I just can't do this summer thing. And I probably held too hard a line on that, but we wrote in the charter what we're gonna do, just let us do what we said we were gonna do. And that's where, both with our own board eventually, and with the Charter Commission, when it became, well, I know that's what the charter said, but we're gonna move this goalpost over here, and we're gonna move this, and we're gonna, you know.
Then there kind of were these questions around like, well, what kind of norming do we do? Do we do things that fit these traditional needs and more traditional structures? And is that what we need to put in place to best serve the students and to make people at the state that are overseeing our progress kind of feel good about what we're doing? Or is it something a little different, kind of more innovative as we originally set out to do? And so I think that middle phase for me is like, that was the tension, was like, what are we norming? And is it in line with the original mission and vision? And I think for me, where I felt like things really kind of started to click was the year that the pandemic started. Beginning of that year, we had a new leadership structure, and with that was this kind of opportunity to re-examine the original mission and vision. And we made some edits, but not any substantial change, but we really refocused on like, this is what we said we were doing, so how can we make sure we do it really well? And I think that was a really good step. And then in March, the pandemic started.
It was stressful. It was hard. Many of the students that were remote weren't very consistent with checking in. We as a faculty were, I think, stressed in our own rights, and also trying to be understanding of those students that are very stressed. I think as a school, we handled it probably as well as any other school did. I think, again, that HCA was always asking the right questions when thinking about how we were going to handle teaching through the pandemic, and putting the students, families, teachers first.
The other thing that was interesting around that time is that the start of that year, when the pandemic hit, was our highest enrollment year. That was where we were in our target zone that we wanted to be in. I think we were a little over 200 students. And I think the initial thing I remember about that was the start of that school year was really challenging in Brunswick, because we had way more students in the building than we had had before. And it was kind of a weird capacity thing where we were like, do we feel like we have enough staff to serve all these students well? Do we have enough space that people are comfortable in this building? And then obviously going to remote learning, and then the next year being a hybrid, kind of alleviated that midway through the year, kind of made that not the big issue. But then schools everywhere saw enrollment decline through the pandemic. People were learning in different ways. People weren't sure about going back to school. All kinds of things were happening. Where we, once had been growing our enrollment, we hit that peak. Then we saw things start to go down again, which kind of brought into question some things around our school structure, the size that made the most sense for us to be sustainable. The piece around the 2 campuses had been challenging for years in different ways. Like, we had some staff that, really were doing one job for 2 campuses 20 minutes away and had to split their time. We had lunch being, made down here and then bused up to us in Brunswick. We had double the bus runs and extra transportation needed for our drivers. And so all of those things had been kind of an extra burden for a long time. But then as enrollment went down and we had less funds, then it kind of became a question of like, does it make sense for us to pay rent on this other building when there are all these other associated costs that we have to incur as well?
In our final year of our first renewal, so that would be, year 9 and 10, we're looking to renew again. One of the reasons why consolidation happened, I think, was from this kind of discovery process in early renewal talks, which brought up the questions about finances, which then had us go towards consolidation.
The really hard thing was discovering that we didn't have enough money to keep 2 campuses going, and the decision to move everybody back down to this school, having had to make to accommodate the fire, to accommodate various rules. We'd made a lot of structural changes up there, which were useful for the school. It was important. At the same time, it cost a lot.
And ultimately, through community conversations, it became clear that the place that people felt like was most important for our school identity was Harpswell.
We asked to consolidate the campuses, which we thought would be a fairly straightforward request because it was to a building that had already been approved because we were already in it. We were able to show that students would fit in the single campus and so forth. And so we put together a proposal, and the executive director, the head of the staff of the commission, recommended that they vote no and not let us do it. And this was in March last year. And so at their March meeting, instead of voting no or yes, they said, bring us a more detailed proposal and we'll look at it and think about it and vote on it in April. So we had a month, and we turned a 7-page proposal into a 125-page proposal. Massively detailed, largely spearheaded by MCF, who pulled the community together, figured out how people were going to fit in different rooms, how the class schedules were going to work, and she had help, but she took the initiative to do all of that. We brought it to the commission, and it passed. That was kind of a surprise because usually the commission doesn't go against the recommendations of the executive director, but in that case they did.
Every 5 years, charter schools in Maine are required to renew their charter. There's an application process. You submit the paperwork, the proof that you've been meeting whatever your charter is saying you should be meeting, and that gets reported to the Charter Commission.
So the Maine Charter School Commission is a body with 7 people on it when it's at capacity. Some of them are appointed by the governor, and others, I'm not sure how they get on there.
They then make a vote to either approve of your charter renewal, to renew your charter with some stipulations attached to it, or to just outright deny the renewal. At that point, the school would decide what next steps are.
The case that I made when we were going into renewal this fall was that, no, we are not declining suddenly. When the renewal was all based around the last 4 years. And when you looked at data from the last 4 years, even though we may not have been meeting the benchmarks that the state set out, we had a steady increase across a lot of different variables that they were looking for. So we were growing and improving on a lot of these things they were looking for. We just hadn't quite yet hit the bar they were looking for that was, in most cases, across standardized testing, attendance, enrollment, different things like that. They were looking for us to, in many cases, exceed what is expected of public schools. They wanted charter schools to be models of excellence in education, doing different things and doing it really well.
It was true that we hadn't met the terms of the school's contract with the state, hadn't met the enrollment, the attendance, stuff we've talked about before. But that had been true in some other cases also. And we hoped that the state would work with us given that our graduation rate and our meeting of standards rate was so good that it showed the school was taking people who needed moving in a different direction and helping them to be able to do that so that they could succeed, and that should override the fact that at any given point not everybody was succeeding. They didn't buy that argument.
The Charter Commission membership changed, and to a large extent I think that's the real problem, that it was people who were appointed to that board. It's not any kind of elected thing or anything. They're appointed, and they were much more data people. You know, we want to see the scores, we want to see this, we don't trust what you're saying. So it was heartbreaking, because we just knew how important the school was to so many people in the past, in the present, looking at the future, people saying, oh, I hope I want to send my kids there, you know, that kind of thing. So it was very, just awful.
But I'll be honest that I never felt like its future was ever guaranteed. I felt like every year there were going to be challenges when it came to meeting the standards of the state and the Charter Commission and things like that.
I don't know that the school ever really realized its charter. And that was probably, for those of us who were here from the very beginning, that was probably the biggest disappointment, that it never became what it set out to be.
When the news of the school closure came, I was deeply disappointed, but had felt for a while that it was inevitable. In fact, I was pretty certain at the time my last year finished, and there was a Charter Commission meeting at the very end of that year, and they agreed to renew us for 5 years. The writing was on the wall then, especially with the administration change from a LePage administration to a Mills administration. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Janet Mills, a big fan of Janet Mills. But that sort of swayed power over to the traditional public schools are the only public schools, and an example had to be made. And it was always, that was my fault, or at least partly my fault, for setting HCA up to be the easiest target. Our test scores were never going to justify A, love from the Charter Commission, and B, middle and upper middle income parents routinely sending us their kids.
So if you take like where we were, you know, this year with all of those things and kind of look backwards, I think you see that the idea behind charter schools initially was that we wanted them to do different kinds of things. But then when people started to really dig into how are we going to see if that's working, do we actually want schools that are doing different things, there were a lot of different opposing viewpoints around what charter schools should be. And this idea that they needed to be better, they needed to be models of excellence, kind of was raising the standards. People weren't sure how to measure what 10 different schools with different missions doing innovative different things should look like. Like, how do you measure that? And the default was, well, standardized tests are good. We do that everywhere. We can compare it to lots of people. But if that's not in the mission of what the school is trying to do, it becomes kind of oppositional. And, you know, in many theories, it's like, well, once we engage students in authentic learning and getting really excited about what the school's mission is, the academic success will follow, and it will follow on the test scores, for instance. And I think that there's sound reasoning behind that, but at the same time, we had 10 years to build a school from scratch and try to get to that point. And I think that's where it was hard. It's kind of a blessing not to have all of the things that might hem in a school community or school culture built and be able to build them yourselves, but also you're starting with nothing. And so when you start from scratch and you have to build up all those structures and you have to navigate a new and changing political environment that isn't sure what to make of you, how to measure your success, it becomes really hard to figure out what do we build and how do we do it in such a way that it's going to satisfy all of these different external groups of people that are looking at us as a weird experiment, trying to figure out how to evaluate our success and meet the needs of a lot of different students that are coming in with a lot of different things that they need us for. And I think there was always this tension too around how much do we just do the mission and vision thing and how much do we try to meet the needs of all of these different students that in many cases like may have a lot of individualized things that would really benefit them. Like, can we meet all of those needs? Is it reasonable to try to do that? How much can we do it? And can we do it in the context of meeting our mission and making these people up here happy? And I think those were the things that got in the way of us norming the structures that we really needed to put in place in that like year 3 to 7 kind of place. I think it was hard to figure out what to focus on. And as a result, when we get to like year 10, then it wasn't a straightforward path from year 1 to year 10. And I think for me, if I could go back and tweak some things, that's where I'd want to make some adjustments, because I think we would have seen different results by year 10 if we had been able to control those things. I think that's a question too, because I think the more I learn about HCA's journey, I think those like external things were really big and a lot more impactful in some ways early on than I was aware of until even like this year.
And I feel like that's what this school did, that we were tilting at windmills. Ultimately, the thing we were trying to slay was unslayable, but at least we tried, you know.
But it's a wonderful enterprise and a model for what kids should experience when they're in school.
I really love the way education is done here. Like, just like I've been saying, I think it's really important to have this style of education available to people, because there are people like me and like my brother and my sister and my friends who just cannot thrive in a traditional setting, you know, because that's just not the way our brains work, and that's not the way we work as individuals.
It was awesome. Like as a kid to be like, oh my God, I'm doing this at school. I'm doing this for school right now, and it was something that I actually cared about. I mean, if I hadn't gone to HCA, I probably wouldn't have ever shared my music with people that I write. I probably wouldn't have performed in front of anyone, and I certainly wouldn't have started filmmaking. I really went from hiding in a library during lunch to doing things I actually cared about and being able to do them in school, which is, you know, something I was always waiting for and that I thought never would happen.
HCA taught me how to accept everybody and just, no matter what, just look at them and say, you have the right to do you. And that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. In my 7 years at HCA, there's very little I didn't learn. HCA really did set me up to be who I am today and to really go out into the world and face it.
But yeah, this is a good school, a really good school, and I'm very sad that it's closing.
It's a different experience for sure. But it's a wonderful experience in my opinion, and people can have their opinions, but those of us who went there, it changed us, usually for the better.
I said at the beginning, I'm an experiential educator, and ultimately the experiences matter, the data doesn't. I guarantee you 20 years, 30 years from now, no one, including you, are gonna remember any of your test scores. Whether you can actually do some job or not, that you're gonna remember, because either you'll be doing it or you won't, you know.
There's a lot of space to do things differently in education. We tried some things that worked really well. We tried some things that didn't work as well. And I hope that those specifics are kind of held by different people moving on, because I think there's a lot to be learned from this experience, and I think that it could be done even better.
There is a huge need for school choice. It's important that charters exist, and I hope that people understand that there needs to be some changes in charter law that help to address some of the issues that make a charter's existence incredibly challenging.
Schools need to be more about the so-called real world and less about the world of who gets into what college. We'll be a hell of a lot better off.
Even though the school closes, our students get to go on and take what they learned here and grew here and became here into new communities that, I mean, as like sad as it is, like those communities wouldn't have that opportunity unless we closed. So they'll take their ideals, they'll spread it.
When you're here and you see the effect that it has on people, and you see how much more kids learn when they're treated with respect and kindness, it's just clearly the way to exist. Not just have a school, but to be.
I believe that the amount of good that this kind of education that our school could have done for people is unbelievable, and it got cut short way, way too soon. And that there are people that love this school so much. Because I think people, like, it feels to me a little bit like people kind of forget that a little bit right now, but like, I love this school so much.
I think all we did here was say, this is what we want in this community, and we worked to make it happen.